Okay, so I'm predominantly looking at wingbacks out of possession, your roles and responsibilities, but I have to put it in the context of each different type of out of possession scenario, and I have to take into context the entire team and all the different variants in order to portray an accurate picture. So what you'll see is a build-up play scenario here, where the ball is central with the keeper, most common picture. Now, I will nearly always have my strikers really narrow in this scenario to protect the centre because there's more likelihood the goalkeepers can do that. As a direct consequence, the centre mids can be a little bit more looser and plan for long balls over the top of them, basically, because they're being protected by the two central strikers. In terms of how that influences the wingbacks, they have to be much more front foot orientated now, because as we're protecting the middle, we're far more likely to force the play into wider areas and into fullback areas. So we need these guys to be able to jump, and we need the centre backs on their side to operate in synchronisation. Wingbacks, your technical aspect of your press is to arc. And the reason why you would do that a little bit, not too dramatically, is that these spaces are often not going to be covered quickly by your centre backs. And so you're just trying to protect that scenario, really. But as soon as the wingback goes, the centre back has to go at the same time and you swing round, okay, and usually become a back four in this particular picture. But I'll come on to that more of in a minute. Now, you'll see more and more modern day teams starting the ball off with centre backs. Now, I personally now would mirror this. Certainly need now, because the first pass is going to get to the keeper and we're wide open, I need my centre mids to be extremely tight and very much on top of their centre mids because there's more risk attached to it now. Now, as soon as it's played to the pass, back to the keeper, don't matter from which side. Okay, for me personally, with most goalkeepers being right footed, this striker will go to keep the keeper on the weak foot, stop them switching play, stretching out, and create predictable scenarios where they're forced long. Okay, again, that can be mirrored in high pressing and open play. Again, I've got my two strikers relatively narrow. I've noticed in a lot of games you have them quite split and quite wide. I think that opens up the middle. Great if you've got centre mids that can win it. Okay, not so good if your centre mids are loose. Okay, and not particularly tight. My preference is always to protect the middle personally, but that's just my preference. But how does that affect everybody else? Well, again, two narrow strikers are going to force the play much more wider, more predictable. Therefore, now if you've got a flat three, your centre mids can be wider because they can already start to anticipate. It's how do you deal with fullbacks now in this situation? Well, most teams will pick one aggressive wing back. And again, you've got the same scenario. As soon as your wing back goes, your back line sort of comes round. The wing back on the far side is always determined by how many numbers on the back line. So you can see here, 3 players are on our back line in this situation. The wing back must make it 4 versus 3. So that's what helps them determine the line. So you can see on this side, I've got the wing back pressing, same technical detail, always pressing the first phase. High. Now you'll notice here I've got 2 strikers up on the last line. So there's no need now when the ball's on this side for the non-ball side wing back to be in the back line. There's enough players. There's already 3 versus 2. So they can hold the midfield line now because we've got enough players. All right, so that it's the numbers on the back line that determine where the non-ball side wing back goes. Again, like I say, I've got the wing back pressing on this side. Some teams like 2 aggressive wing backs pressing, some prefer just 1. So if there's a switch around here on this side, a lot of teams here will want the centre mid or a striker, depending on where you're positioning them, to go and press in these situations. So you tend to, most teams will have an aggressive wing back and a little bit more defensive minded wing back. So what I'm going to cover now in more mid block or high pressing is some of the game scenarios I've seen in. Now, you've had a tendency to split your strikers quite wide, go man for man more in midfield, or 3-4-1-2 esque. Okay, and if your centre mids are tight on their centre mids, that works out quite well. But what we've seen is teams will build 3 versus 2 against 2 strikers, like so. Okay, now if teams do this against, and you want your strikers wide, I would say if it's a centre mid that's going into this line, send one of your centre mids all the way in with it. They've gone to a back 3, they've taken a centre mid out, and it's very easy for you to now match up their line, but also match up in midfield. They've gone to a 3-4-3. If you look, there's less need for a centre mid. We can be 3-4-3 and be matched up player for player. If a team mixes it up and sometimes it's more of a fullback, again, depending on how you want your strikers to play, narrow or wide. Okay, I personally, in this scenario, wouldn't press underloaded. I allow one of my wing backs to stay high and press. Okay, and my strikers will match up 3v3 on this line, with the other wing back sort of dropping back as they need to. And what you're doing is you're just becoming a slightly asymmetric 4-3-3, slightly offset 4-3-3, and that's the only adjustment that you've done. In mid block is where we need a little bit more detail in terms of who's pressing and where are we pressing. So to start off with, again, I've got my 2 narrow strikers protecting the middle. I've got an arced back five where you can see my wing backs are in what I call this little triangle. Okay, and again, the reason why you position yourself in this little triangle between centre back and centre mid, right in the middle of it, is so that it's easy for you to select which line you're most effective in. You can drop into the back line or the midfield line. So strikers are protecting. As a result of the strikers protecting, a flat midfield three can operate a little bit wider outside shoulders of the strikers so they can get out and press in wide areas if they need to, or half spaces, as people like to call it. And again, it's about the position now of the fullbacks. So you can see I've got these lines drawn on here. If the fullbacks are deeper than these lines, I think it's very difficult at times, unless you're well positioned, for wingbacks to jump and press in these situations. So it becomes who is best placed. Is it a striker? Is it a centre mid? Is it a wingback? Again, a personal preference of mine is I don't really want my strikers pressing wide. And the main reason is they could end up tracking back into fullback areas, but they're getting taken away from central areas where their primary focus for me is to be part of that counter attack and planning for us to win the ball and exploit space, which they can't do effectively when they're defending in wide areas. When the fullbacks come inside this line, it's much easier on the first phase for a wing back to be the person that presses. Same detail, arc press, centre back works in synchronisation. Non-ball side wing back is determined by how many numbers are on the back line. So if there's only two, they can hold the midfield line. If there's three, they need to drop back into the back line. Same as a low block. You've got the same triangle, the same arced back five, okay, the same midfield three. Again, distances. Who is best placed? So if the fullbacks are really quite deep, flattening out almost as a back three, and our wingbacks are deep, there's no way they can get that distance. So it's probably going to be a centre mid or a striker who is best placed, who needs to come round and deal with that sort of situation. But where they can, if they're a little bit more inside the yellow line, or if they can read it early, and wing backs, again, can they jump and be the players to press? Centre backs work in synchronisation, arc press again, same details repeatedly. And what I'm going to do is cover another game scenario now in a low block, where sometimes you're outnumbered. Fullbacks can drive on, and as a wing back, you haven't got centre mid coming across, and you kind of can't jump here because you've got this winger in behind you. Common situation in back five, you're kind of occupied in here, but the fullback therefore can travel. The way that most teams deal with this, because you are a back five, well, again, once they get close enough to, it is a centre back in a 2v1 against where a centre mid becomes that centre mid. Everyone comes around as a back four, and eventually the centre mid recovers back into a more central position. And last of all, if a wing back presses on the first phase, which is always my preference where realistic and where possible, and the other one has to pendulum round into the back line, it's almost impossible on a switch around for that wing back to be able to jump on this side unless they can read it really early and they're very athletic and quick to get out to it. And again, if they're occupied. So again, who is best placed? Is it the centre mid? Is it a wide striker, depending on your setup and your system? So in conclusion, they very much, all the different variants depend on the player profiles. So when I've covered all 3/3 there, a lot of it starts with your strikers as well. Do you want to utilize them narrow or wide? Because that has an impact on everybody else. If strikers are narrow, they're protecting the middle, players going to get forced wide. Therefore, wing backs and centre mids can be a little bit more front foot orientated. Then you've got to decide on, do you want both wing backs pressing on both sides? Because that's the kind of profile of wing backs you've got. They're both very aggressive pressers high up the pitch. Or do you have one a little bit more defensive minded, one a little bit more aggressive minded? Okay, in which case you've got to try and determine one centre mid's probably going to be closing down one fullback while one wing back is closing down the other.